Welcome back to the Bees Like That podcast. As always, I'm your host, Chris, and I'm going to make some jokes about myself real quick. So, this is the second take. I was about a minute, 30 seconds into the first one and realized, one, that my mic was way over there. It wasn't even close to, even being in the frame. I didn't have any of my notes queued up, and things were just in kind of a disarray. But I think to get started in any other way would kind of be, I'll say it this way: it's true to my nature. I just sometimes, and then that's not to say that I don't prepare and that I'm not mindful, but sometimes I just go. I just have a thought with something and I just go, and that's one of the ways that I approach podcasting. Like, in the beginning, I didn't usually use or reference any notes, but just kind of riffing. It works, and I have had a lot. I think I've generated some pretty cool content just riffing. But when it comes to matters of like recovery, like 12-step based support, stuff like that, I think it best to be prepared. You know what I mean? I'm not saying like academic level preparation, you know what I mean? And that's not to insult the audience at all, but I think that my point is this topic deserves some mindful intention. So that's what I try to bring. And anyway, just making a little bit of fun of myself regardless. So we are on step 5. I understand that I'm late in my 12 weeks of AA, where each week I detail a step of Alcoholics Anonymous, share some of my anecdotal lived experience with each step, my understanding, and even possibly how I worked the step. I've had some ideas in the last couple of weeks, and I really don't have a good reason for why I haven't created any content, especially around this topic, because I fully intend to follow through. I just haven't. That's just the long and short of it. I just haven't been motivated to do it. But here I am, nonetheless, getting into step 5. And step 5 is admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. So taking that from step 4, or previous step, where we took this painstaking and thorough personal and moral inventory of ourselves, right? It's not completely made up of, but it does include the shit that we're going to use in step 5. A lot of the shit we're going to use in step 5. So, to our higher power, we're admitting, and to ourselves, we're admitting, and to another. This is the key to this, to another human being, because listen, it is valuable to release things to our higher power, for sure. It is also valuable and critical that we admit things to ourselves, like this radical acceptance about the things that are very uncomfortable for us to admit or to acknowledge about ourselves. This is critical. If this isn't in place, and if there's not at least a willingness to approach this, I don't know anyone who's been successful at this step or in recovery without that degree of willingness. But to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. So that typically looks like your sponsor. What a lot of people will do is, your sponsor is the person who's like the abbot, right? They're the shepherd. No matter if you've been in and out of the program, AA or NA or whatever you're a part of, typically the structure is sponsor, sponsee, and then y'all work the steps together. I've not heard of it going any differently. I imagine that there are probably people who made the choice to work the steps on their own. I'm not sure how well that went for them. I've not met anybody who's done that, but if I know one thing about addicts or alcoholics, that you have to leave some room for some variance, because there's going to be someone who has that preference. Anyway, your sponsor is typically the person, as I've said, who you would share this 5th step with. the nature of your wrongs, right? Admitting and building that trust with them. One of the big components of step 5 is the importance of honesty and accountability. Step 5 emphasizes emphatically for complete honesty, a request for complete honesty. It's a mandate, it's a requirement. Complete honesty with oneself and others. Admitting wrongs to another person helps break the isolation created by guilt and shame. This is where I said absolutely where personal accountability and growth begins to take place. This is where we start cultivating these little seeds that eventually turn into seedlings or saplings, whatever the hell the next step is. But this is the place where that starts to happen. It's going to feel weird for a lot of people because inherently, just as people, we don't even have to be an alcoholic or a drug addict. And I understand that some crowds don't make a distinction between the two because alcohol is a drug. We're not going to get on that train today. But just typical human psychology, people don't generally want to share their dirty deeds or air their dirty laundry, especially with another person, unless it is someone that they absolutely trust. And a lot of the time, it's when they're sure that they're not going to suffer any real consequences for it, right? Like they're not going to lose their relationship or their job, or they're not going to face social isolation or any of that kind of stuff. But again, this is where the personal accountability and growth takes place, but it has to be built upon a foundation of honesty and openness and being willing to say, hey, and this is a fight, right? This is a fight this is the way I looked at it and the way I approach the steps. This is a fight for my very life and soul. If I don't take seriously every bit of every step, if I'm not in this thing, it's not going to work. And my thought was, why the hell not? Holding out in front of me a potential for a future that I felt like that I deserved, that I felt like left in me was enough good to justify another shot, right? Another shot at that ring, another shot at life, an opportunity to work hard for to build the life that I felt like I deserved. If I didn't approach it that way, if I didn't hold out in front of me my family and my kids, if I didn't hold out in front of me the very real pain that I suffered at the hands of my disease and the decisions that I made while I was in active addiction, if I wasn't that serious, if I wasn't committed in a life and death battle, it wasn't going to work out. It just was not going to work out. This wasn't something where, I've had this experience, but this wasn't one of those things or times where I was impassioned in the beginning, highly motivated, and then, as time goes on, I wasn't 100% committed spiritually, intellectually, or emotionally. There wasn't enough dog in the fight. And, the people in my direct environment, their hearts would soften, and Chris was able to kind of wiggle about some of these situations, and I didn't take it serious. And what ended up happening is I would end up loaded again and again and again and again, and I continued to I continued to give away more and more of my life every single time. Every single time. I was a willing participant in stepping over my own best interests, working against them. Intelligently working against my own best interests. Some may say it's not very intelligent. That's not what I meant by that. But because I understood that my addiction, my version of this disease, which I don't think that there are many versions, but the one that I suffered, the way that it manifests in my life, is not one where there is any level of use that is not harmful for me. It's life or death, period. And that's just talking in regard to my life. I've not even talked about the consequences felt by my family, by my wife, by my kids. What would happen to them if I chose my addiction path over my recovery path? This was a fight for life and death for me, but is also, I also understood that the far-reaching implications for my son and my 4 daughters were immense. And not potentially, because they didn't just have the potential. There is a reality of life that exists and has existed before where it is a detriment to all 5 of them if I continue down that path. No question. There's no harm reduction. Someone's getting hurt if I continue to use. And if I don't take seriously, as I was saying, each and every one of these steps and every bit of it. There's no place in here where I get to say, well, I don't want to do step 5 because that really doesn't align with how I see myself. Yeah, all right. Or I don't want to do step 9, because I don't want to feel the judgment of other people, so I'm not going to make amends. It ain't how this going to go. You got to do it all, man. Anyway, but this also builds trust and connection. Sharing the exact nature of our wrongs with another human being, most of the time it's going to be our sponsor. It helps build trust, right? And it creates a supportive relationship, which, by the way, for most of us, I'll just speak for myself, I had some support from people, but from me going out to my direct environment, to the people around me, I didn't trust any of them. And it wasn't because of anything, well, at the time it was a perceived slight, right? But I painted myself into a corner with all of my relationships pretty consistently in my adult life, at least as it relates to my drug and alcohol use, where I didn't allow people the space or opportunity, or myself the space or opportunity to build these supportive connections and relationships. I did not allow it. There was no room. Zero. Not to say that relationships still didn't form, but they weren't the type, and maybe on the surface they could look like something that they really weren't. But I brought a lot of sickness to the table. I'll just put it like that. But these kind of relationships, that you build through exercises like step 5, these are the building blocks, because so much of us, before even active addiction took root, we had we had trouble with relationships and trust, right? So this is going to be a place where this emotional labor, right, is shared with someone who you can trust, and they're going to bear just enough of that yoke and burden so that you can get through this and show you, like, hey, this, especially between the men, this is a healthy relationship between two dudes, right? Bro, I am here for you. I got to tell you that I love you. I respect you. I know that this is scary, and it's okay to say that it's scary. Man, you got all the room to cry and to feel everything that you feel. And brother, I'm telling you, this is going to be a place of healing for you. Men don't talk to each other that way. This is an opportunity. I talk to men that way. I talk to my friends that way. This is an opportunity to start to practice being that version of a man in your life. In that vulnerability, you learn through these trusting relationships that you're genuinely not alone. That there are people in this program who keep what they have by giving it away. So they're doing their work at the same time, and y'all both benefit. This last part, this was a big deal for me. And it informed a lot of my decisions in almost all of my attempts to get clean along my journey. I'm not saying it was the sole determinant, but it informed the fuck out of my decisions. And that is, what am I talking about? I'm talking about guilt and shame. I carried with me, I still have, things in my past that I've done that when I think about them, I still can't. I shut that shit down ASAP Rocky, and I stuff it. It is bottom, and I'm not talking about the shit that I've had done to me. I'm talking about the shit that I've done, the ways that I've hurt other people. That makes me sick to my stomach. Makes me absolutely sick. I'm repulsed by the thought of that kind of behavior. I would never in a million years behave that way or treat people that way today. I'm thankful to my Lord for nurturing in me that kind of transformational change to allow me to be who I am today. But I'm telling you, that guilt and that shame, among anything else that is absolute poison, guilt and shame. So relieving that by acknowledging and sharing your past and all the shitty mistakes, that's where we start, like I say, to kind of like jump those hurdles, right? And dump those burdens of guilt and shame. And we start to open the door for forgiveness. And I'm not talking about forgiving other people. I'm talking about forgiving yourself. There's shit, and forgiveness in my mind, at least in my opinion, it comes in levels, and it's not always consistent. Especially when we're talking about forgiving yourself. When I'm talking about forgiving myself, and this is something that's true, and I heard this phrased this way by someone else, so this isn't an original thought, but what I've recognized after hearing it is like it's a pretty apt description. It's not trying to fix or remove in that moment. Dr. Resma, I can't pronounce his last name right now. I've only met him once or twice, but Dr. Resma, been doing some somatic work in this 3-day course that I'm taking. Anyway, just nibbling around that stuff, coming back to it over and over. What he advises, again, is just coming back to it over and over and over. And what we're talking about healing. We're talking about taking manageable bites of something, right? That's what I'm talking about with forgiveness, right? Like there are levels to it. So there are things in my life that I still, even being 6 years clean, that I'm only able to emotionally and spiritually take little nibbles at. And then, as Dr. Resma says, see what starts to emerge around that. Pay attention to the changes and the things that start to emerge around that. And I think that's powerful. And that's the same approach that I take with forgiveness. I just hadn't heard it phrased that way. So I like that description. So that's why I'm sharing it with y'all. But moving forward into recovery with a clearer, not a cleared, like I said, it was just taking little bites out of shit, not completely removing. Because when you remove something, especially from a human being, you have to be prepared to introduce its counter right away. You can't just remove trauma if you don't have something else to fill that space with, right? Because undoubtedly there is a space that needs to be filled, or at least held until that part of a person is healed. So moving forward with a clearer conscience. Not having all of the answers. Knowing that there are going to be things in your life that pop up that you may have left out of step 4 and step 5. And you'll have to, some people, we just go back and we do the steps over and over again. Some people don't, some people do. Some people just do the more critical ones. Like they'll because as we change, we're going to continue to be shitheads. So we have to continue, and you do it daily sometimes, personal and moral inventory. And you share that. We do this. We have meetings. We have men's groups, women's groups, retreats. These are all opportunities to be in community with people and work. I wouldn't call it these pseudo steps because they're legitimate, but you're not actually running through the whole technical and mechanical structure of a step, but you're what I like to say, living by these spiritual principles consistently daily, right? At any rate, that is my take on step 5. I apologize to y'all for being so inconsistent with these 12 weeks of AA, and it may in fact run out to be 16 weeks to cover all 12 weeks, but whatever, dog. If this is my podcast, you don't like it, go listen to somebody else talk about the 12 steps. Anyway, if you didn't do it on the way in, think about doing it on the way out. Hit that like, subscribe, and post notification bell so you can stay up to date on all the cool, fun, wacky, and clean and sober shit we talk about here on the Bees Like That podcast. Peace, y'all.